Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm pleased to give you an insight into the topic of resilience and our book chapter on the relationship between individual and collective resilience at the Eurac conference, Lessons from the Coronavirus Crisis, from Resilience to Multi-Resilience. My presentation today is entitled Robust Through Times of Crisis, Strategies of Resilience. What does psychological resilience mean in dealing with social upheaval? These are the questions and issues we address in these 6 under chapters. We begin by looking at the different levels and concepts of resilience and then go into greater depth and under chapters 2 and 3 on promoting resilience at both the individual and the collective level. Under chapter 4, it addresses the question of how individual resilience can be promoted in the context of crises. Under chapter 5 focuses on the concept of multi-resilience and how it can be promoted and embedded in society. And then finally, we offer some suggestions from promoting resilience at the level considered here. The phenomenon of resilience is increasingly becoming the focus of attention and it's gaining individual, social, and economic relevance. At the heart of the issue is the question of how people remain psychologically healthy despite increasing strain and stress in an increasingly changing environment. Currently, research is focusing on evidence-based approach to promote multi-resilience. In a sense, multi-resilience refers to the robustness of entire societies in the face of different crisis contexts, which makes them not only more responsive, but also more capable of solving problems. Let's walk through this concept in terms of COVID-19 pandemic. International studies were quick to show that the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in significantly increased stress levels to the point of mental illness with concurrent limitations and support system within the population. In addition, a few altered individual and collective behaviors have become established worldwide in dealing with the changed life situation. These include solidarity, reduced mobility, reduced consumption, and the restriction of social contacts. The changes in behavior show that everyday normality can also be broken in future scenarios. At this point, sustainability in the areas of mobility, nutritional behavior, and energy production should be mentioned. All in all, the example shows that people are capable of rapidly changing their daily behavior under certain circumstances and adapting flexibly to new circumstances. Accordingly, crisis as a collective problem could lead to the weakening or strengthening of mental health in society. The exact factors on which the direction of change depends have not yet been sufficiently clarified. Having already learned that there are different levels of resilience, we would like to introduce you here to 3 concepts of the phenomena under consideration. As you already know, the concept of individual resilience is the most common. This refers to an individual's ability to maintain or quickly restore his or her own mental health during or after stressful events. The promotion of individual resilience interacts with social resilience as the former positively influences the latter. Thus, individuals' resilience can be understood as the basis for societal crisis management. The concept of collective resilience refers to the ability of the social system to absorb shocks and stress factors while maintaining essential structures and functions. The concept takes on a strong crisis-specific character. The third concept is that of multi-resilience. This refers to the general robustness of societies in the face of different crisis contexts. Having touched on the individual level concepts of the phenomena of resilience, we would like to use the content below to go into more concrete detail on individual considerations. Let's start by looking at the resilience promoting at the individual level. The introductory quote focuses on the processual nature of resilience. Resilience is a lifelong dynamic learning and development process that can be positively influenced. Resilience research can name 3 forms for the individual handling of adversity. The first is resistance, which means that individuals compensate for negative influences. A second form of dealing with adversity is regeneration, which means that the individual recovers after a short period of stress. The third way of dealing with adversity is reconfiguration. Reconfiguration means adapting to changed conditions. In concrete terms, this can involve changing one's own attitudes and behaviors or acquiring health-promoting skills. I would like now to introduce you to the so-called resilience factors. These are a series of factors that are well documented in the literature and can also be demonstrably trained. Many of these resilience factors interact with each other, or in some cases have strong conceptual overlaps, or are mediated by higher level cognitive and neuronal protective mechanisms in the brain, the so-called higher level resilience mechanism. The resilience factor active coping, for example, means the active management of challenges and stress by means of problem-oriented, emotion-oriented, or avoidance strategies. Self-efficacy stands for the subjective conviction of being able to cope with challenges on one's own, while optimism includes a positive expectation of the future and the positive attribution of causal events. One of the most relevant resilience factors is that of social support. This primarily refers to assess a social network. Recent studies have also concluded that the belief in being able to rely on others alone mitigates the threatening perception of potential stressors. The ability to respond to change by thinking and acting flexibly is included in the resilience factor cognitive flexibility. As you will notice, a distinction can be made between internal and external factors. While the resilience factor social support, for example, is an external factor, active coping is an internal resilience factor. Let us now turn to resilience building at a collective level. Collective resilience is a definitionally incomplete, young, and still under-researched concept. The ability of a social system to absorb shocks and stresses while maintaining its essential structures and functions closest to a possible definition. Many different approaches exist to measures and assesses this collective resilience. In general, social science resilience research largely focuses on the so-called hard factors, while the softer factors such as socio-culture, religion, and socialization are rarely considered. Therefore, it is sometimes difficult to identify effective approaches to strengthening collective resilience. However, collective self-efficacy expectations, social control beliefs, and social cohesion are possible overarching factors for collective resilience. 3 inquiry approaches to collective resilience could be identified according to Glenn. First, cultivating institutional trust. Second, coming together as a community. And third, presenting resilience role models, calling out heroes. In the first approach, institutions play a central role in the transmission of values. If there's trust in the institutions, they are perceived as meaningful, whereas if there is distrust, the opposite effect occurs. In other words, there is no strengthening of collective resilience, but rather a weakening and possible splitting of society. Related to the COVID-19 pandemic is institutional trust needs to be regained because there has been a strong distrust in politic and public institutions. The second approach, coming together as a community, takes place via social media or in persona with the goal of commemorating, condoling, or protesting. An example here would be Boston Strong as a major hashtag after the 2015 attack. The final research approach to collective resilience, presenting resilience role models, calling out heroes, serves primarily to reinforce the positive to mitigate the negative. This strategy was used, for example, in the COVID-19 pandemic by visualizing the performance of everyday people who faced challenges in their daily or professional lives, for example, healthcare workers. It can be stated that the question of preventive protective factors at the systematic level has so far been answered inconsistently by research, and that no conventional research definition or even a model of collective or societal resilience has been reached, and concrete resilience factors have not yet been found with scientific consensus. Collective resilience as the ability of the social system to absorb shocks and stress factors while maintaining its essential structure of functions represent, as already mentioned, the most used definition now. The following exemplary different approaches for measuring or assessing collective resilience and for measures to promote it are currently available. Part Communities Advancing Resilience Toolkit and the 9 factors according to Patel and Patel et al. Part is an evidence-based intervention designed to improve community resilience. It brings stakeholders together to address issues, describe the context, transformational potential, connectedness, and carrying resources, disaster management with the goal of making collective resilience measurable. Here, a resilient community is understood as the ability to transform the environment through purposeful collective action with the premise that the community must effectively cope with and learn from adversity. Patel and colleagues proposed 9 factors. At first, local knowledge about site-specific vulnerabilities and susceptibilities, meaningful problem analysis regarding infrastructure, disaster preparedness, crucial process in one's community. Second, community networks and relationships to establish connectiveness and interconnectedness among community members and trust and orientation to shared values. Third, the communication as a shared knowledge space and a place for exchange, as well as building common communication infrastructures. Fourth, health defined as the psychological and physical well-being, and in this sense, healthcare and healthcare delivery with the goal of modifying facilities to ensure disaster resilience, as well as creating offerings for mental health crisis interventions, acceptance and depathologizing negative emotions and fears. Fifth, governance and leadership. 6, resources which can be tangibly and intangibly are available or accessible to all. 7, economic investments. 8, preparedness. And 9, mental attitudes in the form of feelings, thoughts, attitudes towards uncertainties. In the case of natural disaster or mass tragedies, a shared threat perception and a group identity strengthens solidarity and social cohesion. However, this positive effect depends on perceived leadership, adherence to group norms, and the duration of the threat of crisis. The Cosmos study shows that trust in government predicts individual resilience and can reduce psychological distress. Similarly, a study by Lalo et al. Within the COVID-19 pandemic illustrates that strong trust in politics weakens the threat increasing effects of uncertainty and significantly reduces the associated perceived threats. Trust in institutions can thus, according to Glynn, be considered as a collective resilience factor, which when breached can affect collective and individual resilience. Furthermore, a study by Gardenick et al., for example, also demonstrate that economic insecurity caused by natural disaster or pandemics is associated with reduced psychological well-being of individuals. Consequently, a reciprocal effect relationship between the individual and society can be assumed. That is, collective mechanisms also affect individual resilience. In addition, the collective expectations of effectiveness can also act as a possible mediator, but only if one's own group is perceived as competent and capable of acting. It can thus be concluded that individual resilience promoting through the strengthening of individual resilience factors such as social support, self-efficacy, realistic optimism, and experiencing a shared social identity sometimes has the potential to strengthen collective resilience. We hold that resilient individuals are the most important foundation for coping with societal crises, and rather society-related factors can contribute to collective resilience. According to Karin Fati, there are 4 landmarks for multi-resilience. First, decentralized and centralized decision-making and implementation, the flexible implementation of centralized statewide measures on the one hand and decentralized measures on the ground in municipalities and countries on the other, the pooling of experts from different fields to identify solutions efficiently and soundly to processing societal challenges, and solidarity and collective cohesion among the population. For this process, it is extremely important to maintain a proper balance of both sides, especially at the international level. Second, collective intelligence, which refers to the use of innovative solutions and past experiences to develop best practice through interdisciplinary research groups, conferences, agile working groups, multidisciplinary think tanks, and multi-stakeholder dialogue. One example of collective intelligence was the Vir versus Virus hackathon, a design and programming competition organized by the German government together with several digital initiatives. Another point of orientation is collective cohesion. This includes, above all, the principle of solidarity, the awareness of pulling together and overcoming common challenges. With reference to the COVID-19 pandemic, various forms of solidarity-based assistance developed here. For example, neighborhood help, watch groups for solidarity-based actions and initiatives, Co-View 19 as a solidarity action, for example, took on the task of observing and documenting shifts in societal interactions, discourse, and legal situations. Each form of the solitary actions contributed to the implementation of the political measures, including the curfew and the obligation to wear masks. Individual resilience, as Karin Fati's final stated point of reference, again involves the individual's ability to cope with stress. This basic system component offers, among other things, the ability to regulate emotions or to deal with thoughts in a practiced manner to reduce possible stress arising from media consumptions, for example. Let us now turn to measures to promote individual resilience with the potential to strengthen collective resilience. To do this, it is important to understand that individuals have other social identities in addition to their personal identity. Brewer et al. Referred to this as the social identity approach. Depending on the group or category to which individuals feel they belong, they can adapt to identities such as woman or meins 05 fans, as well as the identity student. The social identity model of collective resilience in emergencies and disasters further suggests that fostering the experience of a shared threat contributes to the perception and strengthening of social identity, which in turn can promote pro-social behavior, thus ultimately collective efficacy and resilience. A shared social identity is a mediating mechanism among survivors between perceptions of a shared fate and supportive behavior in emergencies. Evidence for this link has been found and confirmed in at least 4 different studies. Different disasters such as earthquakes, large fire, stadium disasters, and severe weather disasters were examined. Common fate produces a common social identity. This in return leads to an increased intention to help others and increased expectations of receiving help. Predictably, affected individuals also coordinate as a community. Such a community social identity serves as the psychological basis of so-called disaster communities. To promote resilience on collective level, some suggestions for action can be gathered based on social psychology, which we would now like to present to you. Accordingly, understand about group psychology process is important when designing emergency plans as well. There are numerous misconceptions about reactions such as mass panic. In addition, it is relevant to know and consider the value of norms of the at-risk group. Inclusive practices that involve the public and demonstrate that authorities have confidence in the self-organization of citizens are best suited for this purpose. This can strengthen collective efficacy. Community groups can be fostered so that they form in advance. The focus should be on areas that are at risk of flooding or natural disasters. Another suggested action is to prioritize informative and actionable risk and crisis communications. This means that practical information is provided in understandable language that enables people to act. Included here is also timely information that makes transparent what is known and what is not. Again, it can be highly relevant to emphasize the social identity of the effect on groups. Brazilian researcher Florian Roth coins the 2 terms bounce back and bounce forward. The goal of resilience promoting measures is not so much a return to the state before a social shock event, but rather an increasing adaptation and progressive change, a so-called bounce forward, to constantly changing environmental conditions. Thus, bounce back means a return to the original status, while bounce forward represents continuous adaptation under changing environmental conditions. In the sense of bounce back, a system is more efficient and durable after a crisis. In this context, the tasks of politics include using and expanding the resources and knowledge stocks available in society and promoting social innovations. Strengthening the infrastructure through regulatory requirements is also one of the tasks of politics, particularly because complex systems, interrelationships are difficult to predict before a crisis. All stakeholders are called upon to act. Politics, business, science, media, culture, as well as population. And civil societies has an enormous capacity for self-organization. It is important to involve it. Now that we have looked extensively at resilience building at the collective level, we would like to focus on individual building in the context of crisis. In terms of the bounce forward effect, an individualistic society can evolve into a more collectivistic, resilient, and pro-social society in the face of local changes. Regarding resilience promotion in the context of crisis, various interventions have been tried and tested. Among them, it is the pandemic resilience training. This is a 1-hour group session that took place during the H1N1 influenza pandemic. Following the training, participants reported improved coping. Another example is the social reconnection group. This was a 10-week program during the Ebola pandemic. Participants reported improved coping with grief and a return to daily activities. For future crisis scenarios, it is highly relevant to develop and implement pandemic preparedness plans with resilient interventions to strengthen mental health. Finally, I would like to address the question of how multi-resilience can be empowered or promoted in society. A recent study on collective resilience in times of crisis attempts to find a framework that allows measures such as social distancing to go hand in hand with maintaining or even strengthening social cohesion. Factors such as mutual solidarity and the sense of collective efficacy during crisis are also considered. It was found that collective efficacy depends on the degree of acceptance of the measures. About behavior, perceived social norms play an important role as one's own behavior is adapted to that of the community. Another significant role regarding the perception of social norms is played by media coverage as well as authorities. In the context of this, constructive behaviors should be made visible. The study results show that instructions are more likely to be followed if they come from someone who is perceived to have a shared identity. A wide range of inclusive role models can help to enable different groups to identify. Furthermore, it has been shown that an unequal distribution of burdens and risks can hinder the sense of common destiny. The relevance of maintaining social relationships is also addressed. The maintenance of social relationships lead to the avoidance of social isolation. A wide range of inclusive role models can help to provide identification for different groups. Solidarity behaviors in emerging communities should be publicly highlighted to create a sense of shared identity. Conversely, the myth of collective panic should not be cultivated, or a lack of solidaristic behavior, empty shelves presented without context, as this can lead to insecurities and behavioral cascade. Rather, constructive behaviors should be made visible. Public administration should avoid granting privileges to certain social groups while also considering the social inequality created by some actions. It is also important to emphasize the importance of maintaining social relationships that provide existential security and the sense of shared identity. Social isolation caused by stay-at-home instruction should be avoided if possible. Let's now take another look at this. A resilient society can thus be thought of a societal immune system that is equipped to deal with crises and disasters. Using the terms bounce forward and bounce back, counter-road, we could title two functions of societies. First, bounce back means the swift return to normal functioning after crises have occurred. The second function of bounce forward stands for the generation of growth, progress, and the transformation process where it is the goal of resilience building measures. Let's walk through this using the COVID-19 pandemic as an example. Collective psychological mechanisms such as common good behavior, pro-social behavior, collective sense of responsibility, trust in politics, and central institutions also take effect. Mechanisms here control the acceptance and the implementation of corona rules, which in return directly affect the pandemic event. At the same time, the crisis can be titled as a burning glass, as it comes to highlight the current grievances in our society, grievances in the healthcare system, lack of digitalization, and so on. The resilient society is capable of learning. Let us conclude by summarizing. We have been able to show that most approaches to resilience promoting relate to individuals and specific groups. It remains unclear how the individual factors for strengthening individual resilience can be transferred to a collective level. It is true that we can speak of self-efficacy on an individual level and collective efficacy on a society-wide level. Nevertheless, it remains unclear how it relates to other resilience factors. Overall, strengthening individual resilience strengthens collective resilience. However, interventions for individuals have not been evaluated for society. What is required of policymakers? This should enable resilience promotions for a broad clientele, especially for vulnerable groups. In addition, social cohesion should be strengthened. This can be done, among other things, through reliable, transparent, and continuous crisis communication. The requirements also include the promotion of social projects to support social interaction and the reduction of social injustice to prevent poverty. The development and promotion of cultural or spiritual encounter opportunities is also called for. In conclusion, the current crisis should be seen as an opportunity to gain experience, to extend global forms of cooperation, to improve existing pandemic plans and crisis communication strategies regarding best practices, to strive for a so-called multi-resilience as a major goal. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now at the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Unfortunately, I cannot take part in the concluding discussion, but I'm of course available for further questions via mail and telephone.